Hello and welcome to another Classic Golf Clubs. I've got something slightly different for you this week. For those that watched the first video I made, I mentioned a neglected area of collecting for golf clubs, and that's the coated shaft era, the 1930s through to the 1940s, possibly even the the early 1950s. It's an area that is overlooked because the clubs, there's just not a lot of information about them, I think, is one of the main things. Also, after all that time, there aren't many good condition ones around, let alone sets of clubs. So today I thought we'd do something slightly different. Rather than just look at one set of clubs, I'll look at a number of clubs and try and plot the development from the simple blade of the hickory era through to the more complex shapes that we see today. I'll be focusing on the 1930s. As I say, this is about the coated shaft era. I've just got a club here I can give you a quick look at before we get started. This is what I mean by a coated shaft. It's a steel shaft, but it's got a brown finish in this instance. They did come in other colours, sort of bamboo effect, black, green even. So that's a typical coated shaft club, and we'll be looking at those in a bit more detail. Before we look at some clubs, let's step back a moment and just look at the introduction of steel shafts. In the title I said every golfer needs to know this. Probably not, but it is one of the biggest changes in equipment ever seen, so I think it is worth covering. As long ago as 1894, a solid steel shaft had been patented in Edinburgh by Thomas Horsburgh, but it hadn't been successful, probably down to the weight. British company Ackles and Pollock was granted a patent for a tapered seamless shaft in 1913, but it was banned by the R&A. The continued growth of golf as a participation sport, both in the UK and America, meant that by the mid to late 1920s, the availability of good quality hickory wood for making shafts was becoming an issue. At the same time, steel shafts were improving and pressure was being put onto the ruling bodies. In 1923, the United States Golf Association had barred the use of steel shafts in official play, but in early 1924, they changed their mind and approved steel shafts. However, the R&A continued to resist. In 1923, the American Fork and Hoe Company began manufacturing steel golf shafts, and in 1928 patented a step-down process for steel golf shafts to become known as True Temper. In 1949, the company changed its name from the American Fork and Hoe to True Temper. Back in the UK, in June 1929, Sandwell Park Golf Club approved a local rule allowing the use of steel-shafted golf clubs in all competitions. Believed to be the first club in Britain to do so, it was a decision possibly influenced by the fact that Walter Hackett, the MD of Ackles and Pollock, was a member of the club. A small number of other clubs followed suit, and under growing pressure, on the 26th of November 1929, the R&A legalised the use of steel shafts for golf, partly basing its decision on assurance from the USGA that steel shafts would not alter play in the same way that the adoption of the Haskell ball had done in the early 1900s, which led to the extending of golf courses. Shortly after this legislation, Ackles and Pollock entered an agreement with True Temper to manufacture step-down shafts under the True Temper name for the European market, but they also continued to produce their own Apollo range. Over the next 5 or 6 years, hickory shafts were slowly superseded by steel, and even staunch hickory advocates such as Henry Cotton and Joyce Weatherhead began to use steel shafts. So without further ado, let's see if we can make a case for collecting coated shaft clubs. We'll cover woods first, as there's not been a huge amount of development in the woods over the years. We'll start off with this hickory club, which probably dates from about 1910, 1920, somewhere around there. I don't know whether you can see the script on there, if I can get the light on it correctly. It's upside down as usual. Swing that round. You can see the maker's name stamped on the top, which was often the way, Anderson and Blythe. Although I should really say that more often than not, it was the club professional's name that would be stamped on the top. This was made by a company called Anderson and Blythe. It's a brassy, club, so it's got a brass sole plate. It wasn't meant as the driver, it was used to play shots from the fairway, and hence it's got this brass sole which gives a bit more weight to the bottom of the club, helping to get the ball in the air, and also protects the base of the club from being worn away. You can see the face. It's a plain wooden face, no insert or anything. Balls of this time weren't that hard, and we've got what's called a slip plate there, which was additional protection on the leading edge of the club. That would often be a horn, a piece of horn that was slipped into there and screwed into place. The shaft itself is a hickory shaft, of course. I think this one goes all the way through. They normally went all the way through to the bottom and were sanded off there. Whipping on it, that just provides some extra protection for the neck of the club, which is its weakest point. As the neck tapers down, it gets thinner and thinner. So if we can wrap that with some protection, that makes the club a little bit stronger. I'll just move that one over to the side there. And then the next two that we've got are, it's always difficult to date these clubs, but I would think that these are 1930s. This is the driver, and we can see here this follows very much the pattern of drivers from the hickory era, in that it's not got a brass sole plate, it has got the bone slip plate at the front. These weren't used from the fairway, the ball was normally teed up, so the base of the club didn't get so much wear. We can see a giveaway point here if you are wondering whether a club is hickory or steel shafted. On this one we can see the steel circle there with a wooden plug in the middle just to stop dirt and such going up the shaft, and that's an easy way to tell whether the club is a hickory or a steel shafted club. And the other easy way is just to put a magnet on the shaft. Still a plain face, no insert or anything. The maker on this one, it's stamped Lori Octoloni. Well, I'm not sure whether it's by him or whether it was by the company D&W Octoloni, but it's a Scottish club. And we have here also the, just put that one back there. What is this one? Just double check. The spoon. So this is between, well, you had the brassy first and then you had the spoon. The spoon was a slightly more lofted fairway club, and again you can see it's got a brass sole plate. Doesn't cover the whole base this time, it's just protecting the centre area. Again we can see the steel shaft coming through there. It's got a number 3 on it, so we're starting to see the use of numbers now. I don't know if there was a number on this one. Yes, there's a number 1 on that one as well. So we're starting to see a move towards more familiar ways of referencing a club rather than driver, brassy and spoon and such. Again we've got the Lori Octoloni signature there. We've still got whipping on the shaft, and that protects the neck of the club, and we can see there, I'll look at the steel shaft on this one. It's a true temper shaft. If I just spin this round, banging too many things, I don't know whether we can see that. I'll try and zoom in later on. So it's not a true temper, this one. It's an American shaft, high power, and it's got stiff on there, so I'm assuming this was a stiff flex. Funnily enough, the driver has got a slightly, what I assume is a slightly softer flex. This one is called a semi. If you can see that there. I've got semi. At the time, driver shafts were often more whippy than the iron shafts. That was how players preferred them, whereas nowadays we mainly see stiffer shafts in the long irons and the drivers. So that's a couple of nice 1930s coated shaft clubs. I don't know what the coating is. Pyratone, which is often referred to, was a sort of a trade name, and whether this is Pyratone or not I don't know, but it's a nice brown finish, and the clubs are in very good condition considering their age. So that's the first 3. I'll just pause there and bring up the next ones. Okay, the next 4 to look at. We can see straight away that I'm already breaking the rule here, because I've got 2 chrome shafted clubs, but they're interesting anyway, so I thought I would include them. We'll start with those because this one is, I think, a very early example of a chrome shafted club. You can see it's a stepless shaft, which most of the wood shafts were at this time, but the head itself is very much in the style of the hickory drivers. We've got a name there, which I'm pretty sure would be the Club Pro. Does it say somebody Sibson autograph? It's a plain wood face still with lines on there. Bone, well, actually that one looks more like a fibre, maybe a pressed fibre slip plate screwed into place. We can see the steel shaft protruding at the bottom there. We've got a screw holding that in place as well. But the chrome in itself, it's worth looking at. It's not the best quality, which is why I believe that chrome shafts weren't adopted straight away, because the science or the engineering behind chrome plating wasn't very good at the time. So most people went for coated shafts. So that's that one. I don't think there's a shaft label on that anywhere. Just have a quick spin round. No, there's nothing else on that. And then we'll look at this one. Again, we've got a straight metal plate. It's aluminium now. I mentioned in a previous video that aluminium was used because it was slightly lighter, and the large block of wood that was on a driver anyway, if we started to add brass and other heavier metals, it would make it a little bit too heavy. We can see here it's a Forgan par-shot model, which was used, a model that was in production for quite a long time. So exact date for this club, again, I don't know. It could be 30s, could be into the 1940s. St Andrews was where Forgan were based. They were eventually taken over by Spalding, who continued to produce Forgan marked clubs. Again, plain face, no insert, and the shaft on this one, if I can bring that round, it's a medium flex. Hopefully that's in focus. And on the other side, it's an Apollo shaft made in England. Apollo made, I think, the first steel shafts in England. They were based in Birmingham and produced a lot of very good quality shafts. So that's another brown shaft. It's got a plastic collar there which just tidies up the finish, but we've still got the whipping to protect the neck of the club. These plastic collars would often extend down over the whipping just to tidy up the whole appearance. So that's a nice club there. We've then got this one. Again, I don't know what date this one would be. It was a club that was in production for quite a while. It's another Forgan, and this is a Forgan Deluxe, and it's a 2-wood, and this would be called a swept sole plate. You can see the straight head screws, which is a good age indicator. I can't remember exactly when cross head screws came into being, but if you've got straight head screws, it normally indicates an old club. Although, as we can see here, we've got cross heads on the face. This one has got an insert, so my guess is that this would be a 1940s club. Again, we've got the collar there and the whipping on top. This is one that I restored because it was in pretty poor condition. So I wanted to play it, so I stripped down the finish and recoated it and reset the sole plate and the insert. The shaft itself is pretty degraded, really. You can see there's a lot of wear on there. In some places the coating is missing altogether, but it still works well enough. And the shaft band, another indicator that this is a club post-war. It's a True Tempo rocket shaft, and I think this came out certainly sometime in the 1940s. The grip itself is a nice leather grip. I've reconditioned that, and we've got an end plug in there as well. That's a nice club, and it's in playable condition now. The fourth one we've got here is an example of a type of club that was seen more in America, and that's what's often referred to as a fancy face club, where there were patterns of dowels and such in the face, and different materials were used to provide a very attractive looking club, and some of these are works of art in themselves. This is a relatively simple one. The head itself is a patent type. We can see a dish top there, and I can't remember who patented this. I'll bring the name up later and stick it in the side somewhere over here. But it's made in the Derbyshire area. Peak High was the club that the professional was associated with at the time. So just spin that round again. This was the driver. It's an aluminium plate, and the shaft on this one is quite a bit worn. So this is pretty much worn away, all of this one. But the main shaft band, it's a True Temper Dynamic, which was around in the 1940s again. I'm not sure exactly when that came out. I'd love to get a full date range for the various True Temper types. But this is from a ladies set, unfortunately, because I'd love to be able to play these. Well, obviously this looks like it needs a bit of restoration to make sure that faceplate is well set into position. But I think these are more of a display model for me now. Very nice club. So that's covered those four, and we'll just look at some modern clubs just to see how they come up to line. I'll just pause there and bring those three in. So 3 chrome shafted clubs here. The first has got somebody's initials on it. It's actually a John Letters club. The SS was added by somebody, who knows who, Samuel Smith maybe, who can say. We can see we've got an insert in here, 4 screws in a diamond pattern, aluminium sole plate. It's just a straight sole plate as previously. Made in Scotland, John Letters name there, John Letters cleat mark. The whipping, standard whipping, again we've got a small section there for the just to tidy things up above the whipping. The shaft band is a True Temper Profit. These were in the 1950s, and we've got a nice two-tone leather grip with a bit of stitching in there as well, just to finish that. So nice club, but needs restoring before I'd take that out on the course. Next one, we're getting more modern now. I showed these in the previous video. This is a 1962 club, Gary Player. We can see the beginnings of the or sort of heading towards the most common type of sole plate seen on the last woods, really. So it's swept with a wider part at the back there. Aluminium sole plate on this 2 wood. Nice insert. And then the final one I've got is what most of the last woods look like. Sole plate, this is often referred to as a butterfly sole plate, these either sides being the wings, I think. And they gave much better protection to the whole bottom of the club, so you were protecting the heel and the toe of the club better. We can see there we've got a port to adjust the weight should you wish to do so. Still got the insert there, so this was pretty much how woods evolved. There were some slight a small number of clubs after the larger metal heads started to come in. Some of the last attempts to compete with that were using even larger wooden heads, but as I said previously, the larger the head gets, the heavier it gets, and it becomes too difficult to swing. So to achieve these larger heads, we saw deep dishes in the tops there, and also the heads were hollowed out and filled with cork, so that obviously cork is a lot lighter than wood, and that was probably one of the last hurrahs of the persimmon or the wooden wood era. So that concludes the woods. To round off, a quick timeline of the woods over the last roughly 100 years. Apologies for the small text, but I had to fit everything in. Starting on the left with a hickory shaft from approximately 1910 to 1920, and then through some early steel shafts, and we can see the development of the wood head shape. Onto the bottom line, and second from left, we have a fully graphite club, this one by Mizuno, which matched pretty much the shape and size of the previous persimmon woods. We then have one of the first steel head clubs, and interesting, you can see that these are actually smaller than the previous persimmon woods due to the weight of the steel. We've then got another slightly later steel head, and this one uses a mix of metal and plastic to allow a slightly larger volume than the previous Titleist one. Then we've got one of the first titanium drivers, and we're looking at 300cc now. Finally, we have a 460cc head in the shape of this Titleist 909 D2. It's interesting how little the head shape's changed over the first 70 years, but in the last 30 years the driver has become a completely different animal. Before I move on, let's just have a look at a vintage bag. Whether this is a 1930s bag, I've got my doubts. I think it's more likely 1950s. But it's a similar sort of style to the things that would have been used in the 1930s, 1940s. It's basically a thin bag. We've got the top there with 3 compartments. How you'd arrange that will be down to the individual. We've got a small side pocket for balls, teas and such. No other pockets, and this is the biggest disadvantage for old bags, I find. The lack of storage space. These days we like to carry everything by the kitchen sink with us, waterproofs, food, you name it. Some golfer's going to be carrying it in the bag. But the old bags have very little space. Sometimes you'll have this attachment here, which is quite a useful thing. I've never been sure whether it's a rain hood. I think it's a dual purpose really. It can be used as a rain hood. It can also be used as a cover for the clubs when in transit. So if you were going on a train, you could put your clubs in there, flip this over the top, zip it up, and the clubs wouldn't fall out of the bag then. So it's quite a useful accessory. And also when it's not in the closed position, you have it down the side there, and you can put a bit of clothing in there, a couple of sandwiches maybe, a bottle of drink, who knows, whatever you like. Very basic carrying strap. You don't want a heavy bag if you've got that sort of strap, otherwise you're going to have a sore shoulder at the end of it. There is an umbrella strap on there. We can see the maker on this one is Greban, who made a lot of bags around that time. Made in Scotland. Don't think there's anything in the pocket there. A few dead mice maybe. So yeah, that's a period golf bag for you. Leather top. I don't know if this looks plastic down there. They were made from a variety of materials. Canvas being a common one in the 1930s. I'd originally intended to make this a single part video covering coated shafts, but it seems to be growing and growing, and I think I'm going to have to make it into at least 2 parts, possibly 3. So that's a good excuse for me to remind you to subscribe and press the bell button so you get a reminder when the next part comes out. Well, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.